Hello, everyone. I'm Henry Munoz, host of Momento Latino's podcast series, The Momento. Everyone has a moment that changes their lives and puts them on the road of life. Together, we'll illuminate the triumphs and the challenges of the Latinx community by focusing on the momentos that make us who we are.
He made history running for President of the United States. He's been the mayor of San Antonio, Texas, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He's known victory and he's known loss. Please welcome to the Momento, Julián Castro. On the day before this election, Julián, how do you feel in this moment?
I feel happy right now because I feel like people are coming out in record numbers in my home state and across the country out of a sense of urgency and a desire for change. And with everything that we've seen over these last 4 years, how terrible Donald Trump has been, particularly to the Latino community, I feel happy because I think enough people recognize that and they recognize how urgent it is to change leadership.
Does it make you angry that you're not the nominee for President of the United States?
No, not at all. I think anybody who starts running for president recognizes that they may well not win. I remember having a conversation right before I announced with President Obama. And one of his points was, hey, look, you never know what's going to happen. He said that when he launched his candidacy in 2007, I think he said he thought he had like a 30% chance of actually winning. Which wasn't to say he lacked confidence, just that you never know what's going to happen. And certainly as a first-time candidate, as somebody that didn't have the name ID, the resources, and so forth, I wasn't necessarily thinking or expecting for sure that I was going to win. And I'm proud of the campaign that we ran. If you look at the issues that we're dealing with in 2020, in many ways, what I laid out last year about making investments in things like raising the minimum wage and in housing and in police reform and changing our immigration laws. In a lot of ways, those are more resonant in 2020 even than they were a year ago. So I feel like we put out a blueprint, a vision for the future of our country that is going to have a lot of support and hopefully turn into good things like legislation on police reform that the House of Representatives has already passed. I think we have a lot to be proud of.
You have said that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? This is a marathon. So what would you say to the young people out there about running a marathon in this country at this moment of divisiveness and lack of cultural understanding?
I would say that especially to the young generation, you have it in your hands to shape your own future and the future of this country. With Latinas and Latinos especially, a quarter of the people in this country under the age of 18, according to the census, are Hispanic. That means that the destiny of this country is intertwined with the destiny of the Hispanic community like never before. The country can't do well unless the Latino community does well, and vice versa. And so young people who sometimes may feel like they're on the outside or be disillusioned or feel like progress is not being made quickly enough, which all of us always feel, just understand that progress never comes as quickly as you would like. But that your activism, your participation in our democracy, using your voice, that is accelerating it little by little, making that progress closer and closer. And the good news for somebody who's 20 years old right now is, golly, just think about the amount of progress that we've seen in our lifetimes in the last 30 years and that they're going to see because things are picking up even more and more and more.
So it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And the first time I ever met Julián Castro, he was a baby. He's sitting in the lap of his mother at an organizing meeting in San Antonio, Texas. I remember my father talking about your mother, about how smart she was, but she was radical. Her ideas, what she represented was youthful right? Where we need to go, impatient. We have to make change, right? And so here you are, one generation, imagine that, one generation later, making history, running for president of the United States. How does that feel? Growing up in your house, you and Joaquin and your mom, what was the moment where you knew your life would be different?
I think just that being around my mom, she was raising us after the age of 8 as a single parent, along with my grandmother. My grandmother was kind of like a second parent. I don't know that there was one moment. It was just the way that she brought us up. She brought us up with a social conscience, dragging us to speeches and rallies and, 3-hour organizational meetings. And we always felt almost an obligation to try and do something for other people and not just ourselves. I never thought that the future for me would be, go to school and then you're just going to go make your money. I always thought in some way that I was going to try and help other people. And I got that from her. And just little by little, we recognized that we had to do something to, in our own way, however we could, try and make the world a better place. As Pollyannish as that sounds, but, that's what everybody who goes into public service, you would hope, is fundamentally trying to do, is to make things better in their community.
I think our community is a community that is used to loss and never being treated equal. So you're a person who is a great leader, but you've had loss, right? I mean, you didn't win your first election for mayor of San Antonio. What was your greatest loss and what did you learn from it?
Well, I think professionally at the time, losing my first race for mayor when I was 30 years old, it was a very close race, thought I was going to win, ended up not winning. And I found that it's true what they say, that you learn more in defeat oftentimes than you do in victory. Because if you have any sense of self-pride, when you lose, it makes you try and figure out, what could I do better? What did I do wrong? What did I do well? Why didn't I win? Especially when you lose a close race. And then secondly, when you lose, especially in such a public way like you do in politics, political loss is different from a lot of other losses, which are more private. It really forces you to do a gut check about whether you care enough about the goals you have in public service to try at it again. In other words, to risk the same public failure. And for me, I had a chip on my shoulder about my hometown, our hometown of San Antonio, that I wanted to see it be a place where more people could have the kind of opportunity that Joaquin and I had. And so I really did care about that. And I was willing to risk another failure. And of course, ran again and won. All of us have other types of loss. I think in my life, the loss of my grandmother when I was 21. I think about all the loss that people are having right now with COVID-19 of family members that they never expected in a million years they would lose. I've found that these different types of losses, they cause a lot of introspection, right? And hopefully we're able to turn that loss, whatever type of loss it is, and make us stronger and learn from it. At least that's what I've tried to do.
Should we be angrier? I wonder about our community. I always think maybe we should be. What is it about us that we put up with loss and disrespect and allow people to call us names and don't stand up for ourselves? Should we be angry?
My dad was very involved in the Chicano movement for a time, like my mom. And in 1971, NBC News sent a crew, part of the Huntley-Brinkley report, to do a profile on Chicanos in San Antonio and their movement. And one of the people they interviewed was my dad. And he said something back then that I think in a lot of ways is true. He said, that oftentimes the community has had this stoical, mystical approach to life and to grappling with all of the obstacles or challenges that are put in front of it. And I think a lot of times that's true. I think of my grandmother's attitude and almost like an ability to take it and not overreact At the same time, I think, unfortunately, too often times, that has also translated into under participation. But it's also because a lot of times we've been ignored or under invested in and, under attended to politically, given up on too often times. And that's why I'm proud of what my mother and father were involved in, and your dad too, in his, a very important way, which is like not accepting either the rejection, the shortchanging, the dismissal by the powers that be or the mainstream, and also not accepting a stoicism or complacency or maybe there's just nothing we can do about that attitude. That there was a real price to pay, in generations past for people that rocked the boat. I think the good news today is that our youngest generation is much more in a place where they're willing to mix it up. And I mean that in a good way, in the sense of willing to get involved and call out bullshit where it exists and channel their energy into democratic participation and not accept that things have to be the way that they have always been. At least that's what I hope. I think this election, the analysis afterward, especially of who came out and for what reason, is going to tell us more about that.
This podcast is brought to you by Momento Latino.
Tell people about your grandmother.
Yeah, my grandmother's name was Julián Castro. She came to the United States when she was 6 or 7 years old because her parents had passed away in northern Mexico, and her nearest relatives lived in San Antonio. So they brought her over in 1922. She had a hard life. She lost her parents early, and then the woman who was the mother of that family that she came to, kind of her second mom, passed away a couple of years after she got to San Antonio. She got yanked out of school in elementary school, so she never finished her education. She worked as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter, raised my mom as a single parent, and had type 2 diabetes her whole adult life. And, as sweet as she was and as dedicated as she was to my mom and to Joaquin and me, she also, she lived a hard life. She had demons that affected her whole life. I told this story during the family separation from a couple of years ago that my grandmother, when she was in her 70s, would still cry like a little kid because she had been basically taken away from her mom while her mom was on her deathbed and wasn't able to properly say goodbye to her. And I was saying I could imagine in a different context, a much more malicious context, these kids who were separated from their parents and the impact that would have on them, because I saw that in my own grandmother in a different way 70 years later, how it affected her. But when Joaquin and I were growing up, my grandmother was this colorful character that would drink Old Milwaukee and watch telenovelas at night, watch The Young and the Restless and General Hospital and One Life to Live during the day. She would make us chicken and rice, and she'd make menudo and all sorts of other Mexican dishes. When she went to church, she didn't go every Sunday, but when she did, she would still wear a veil, the way that women traditionally would. So she was this combination of old world custom with like a sense of burden on her that you could feel, and that she was worn from all of these experiences over the years.
Tell us about your mom.
Well, my mom was a hellraiser. My mom was civic oriented from a very early age in high school, and then got involved in the Young Democrats in college, got involved in the Chicano movement, the Raza Unida party. My mom basically, I think, has always had this sense of trying to right the wrongs that she sees and not accepting the status quo. And so she ran for city council in San Antonio in 1971 at a time when very few women and very few people of color, very few Latinas ran for office. She didn't win because there were no single member districts. You had to run citywide, but she stayed very active on different women's empowerment issues, different Hispanic community issues, made sure that Joaquin and I had an appreciation for participating in our democracy, worked for the city of San Antonio and then the housing authority, but always remained active, supporting good candidates. And even though she never held office herself, she's never been able to put it down. Even now she watches MSNBC and, is looking forward to coming over to our place on election night. She has a heart for justice, which I have always appreciated.
I don't think people know what Raza Unida was. You need to describe for people why Raza Unida was so incredibly important.
The Raza Unida Party was part of the Chicano movement, the Mexican-American civil rights movement, and it was a third political party that said at the time that neither Republicans nor Democrats were doing enough to make life better in the United States and give opportunity to the Hispanic community, especially the Mexican-American community of Texas and the Southwest. This party got on the ballot in states like Texas, California, Colorado, New Mexico, I think a little bit in Arizona, perhaps. And, they won some local offices in places like Crystal City, Texas, which is considered the birthplace of the Raza Unida. In fact, just this year, in January, I think January 12th, marked the 50th anniversary since the founding of that party. And it was all about putting pressure on both political parties to finally be inclusive and to pay attention to a community that had a dropout rate that was astronomical, more than 70%. Very, very few people that got to go to college, but people that were getting drafted to go to the Vietnam War during that time. Neighborhoods that were habitually crumbling and underinvested in, with poor drainage where people would drown when you had flooding. Folks working in the fields who had terrible working conditions without bathrooms, with no benefits, very little pay. Essentially, you had in that time a community that was taken advantage of, that was totally overlooked, that was taken for granted, oftentimes at the polls. And this party was there saying, no, we're not going to stand for that. We're going to empower ourselves, and we're going to do it in the most American way that you can possibly do it. I laugh sometimes when people insult an effort like that, because it was all about getting people to vote. It was not violence. It was not just negativism. It was about, hey, we got to be empowered. We got to go express ourselves in the most American way that you can, which is at the ballot box. Obviously, it wasn't a successful effort in the long run, and most of those people became Democrats after that. My mother became a Democrat again, very proudly. But I do think that it has never gotten its due in terms of the fire that it lit under a lot of people. And it was one piece of starting to shift things so that there was more participation. After that, you got the great work of people like Willie Velasquez and the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, and then the growth of the community in numbers that made it harder to ignore in Texas and California, and so many other places. And you can draw a straight line, all the way until the election of 2020, and so many of these issues that we're still grappling with regard to the Latinx community. Obviously, the community is much bigger than just the Mexican-American community and much more diverse. And it's so fascinating. You can write that story about the Raza Unida or Chicano movement in the Puerto Rican community and the Cuban-American community in a different way, and other communities who have stood for empowering yourself through voting.
Willie Velasquez was my cousin.
Is that right?
Willie was the first cousin of my mom. And I remember meetings with your mom and Willie Velasquez and the hotbed of political activity that existed around, I think, St. Mary's University, and the birth of the Raza Unida Party and Ramsey Muniz and all of these people who were young and decided that they could change things. And in a way, I kind of wish that we honored that and elevated it and don't run away from it and recognize it's important. And we need the importance. And we need some of that today, I think, because the thing that worries me about our people is that we feel like nothing ever changes for us, and our vote doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest enemy to political participation is the people that believes that it doesn't matter whether they participate or not, that nothing's going to change. And of course, you're in a catch-22 because nothing is going to change if you don't participate. And you need that fire, you need folks that are trying to light that fire and to stoke it within a community in a positive way, and participating in our democracy is the most positive way that you can do it, to express your opinion. And in so many ways, we need that energy now. We need that enthusiasm.
This podcast is brought to you by Momento Latino.
Do you remember the moment before you walked on that stage and gave that speech at the Democratic National Convention? Help people to understand what that felt like to come from where you were born in San Antonio, right? To represent the United States of America and get ready to walk on that stage and talk to the entire country, to the world.
It was nerve-wracking. I had a conversation with President Obama at a reception that he threw for the cabinet and some of the executive staff at the White House. I want to say after his last State of the Union, or it was sometime in the last year that we were there. And we started talking just for, a minute about our two keynote speeches. And I told him that 30 seconds into my speech, I felt like I was going to pass out and make a huge embarrassment of myself. Like literally on TV in front of 25 million people, just pass out. And like everybody would do, what in the hell? This guy doesn't belong anywhere near this stage. And he said that looking back on that he could tell in the first, minute or so that he was nervous. And but there's so much that goes into it beforehand. Practicing, writing it along with speechwriters. They have at the DNC, as you know, somebody that goes through it with you and coaches you on inflection and your gestures. So by the time you go on stage, I was very nervous. Obviously, I'd never been on a stage like that before in front of 19,000 people and 25 million people watching. And what's also nerve-wracking is that that the network cameras are directly on your face. There's no give, there's no taking a break or anything like that. But it's like a lot of other things. You get past the jitters within the first minute. Within the first minute, then everything kicks in that you're used to, that you've practiced. And then by the end of my speech, which I think was like 17 or 18 minutes, I could actually enjoy it a little bit and take in the moment of being there and the significance that it would have for a lot of little Latinos and Latinas that were watching, that heard the message that night and could say, oh, wow, like I can do that. I can be there. We have a role to play in our country. That made me very, very happy.
So if you were giving a keynote speech today and you were speaking directly to the American people, and in particular to the Latinx community of young people who have been told since the time that you gave your speech that they don't matter, they shouldn't be here, they're rapists and thieves, and they don't contribute to this country, what would you tell them?
Say that our country can't prosper unless you prosper, and that we need you. No matter what you've heard from this president over the last 5 years, we need you. And that better days are ahead, I believe. And the other thing I would say is that November 3rd is not an ending, it's a beginning. When it comes to immigration reform, when it comes to raising the minimum wage, when it comes to making sure that everybody has health care, when it comes to controlling things like the cost of insulin for so many people in our community. November 3rd is not the end. Like, get your shoes on, because we're going to have to make sure that Congress and the next administration live up to all of the promises. And I think we can do that in a productive way.
I have to ask you, how do you feel about the fact that we have not yet had our momento? We haven't had our moment.
Yeah, it's frustrating. What I found running for president is that too oftentimes our community is invisible. It is overlooked for whatever reason. I think people one-dimensionalize the Latino community in different ways. Number one, to a lot of people, they think everybody got here just 5 minutes ago if you're Latino, even though your family, my family, good examples. I mean, in 2 years, it'll be 100 years since the grandmother that I grew up with got to the United States. There are families all over this country who are Hispanic that can trace their lineage in this country, even further back than that. We've been contributing to the forward progress of the country for a long time. It's basically just almost as long as it's been around. Then secondly, I found weirdly that people seem to think of us as helpers. Like, oh, go fulfill your role. Go get your people out to go vote. Go do that. But, oh, you mean you want the top job? I don't know, didn't you just get here recently? We still have to break down a lot of stereotypes and this invisibility that exists. And that's nowhere more true than in mainstream media and in Hollywood, which my brother Joaquin has been taking on. Hopefully that will change. I would be lying to you if I said I'm encouraged that it's going to change quickly. But I do think that we can't just wait for it to change, that we need to actually push it to change. And now I'm not just talking about Hollywood, but also mainstream media, our politics, all of that. You and I both come from families that didn't wait, that took action to try and change things for the better. And maybe the thing I'm most excited about is every time we have one of these transformational elections, like I think 2020 may well be, it casts a wide net and picks up a lot of other families. And you're going to get a certain number of those that carry on that torch of activism, of participation, of changing things. And we're only going to see their impact in the years to come.
You can't be what you can't see.
Yeah, no, that's true.
What do you want to tell people about the future of Julián Castro? Where are you going next? Everybody wants to know, Julián. You're a young man. Everybody wants to, and you're incredibly important. I mean, I want you to understand how important you are to, in particular, young people who look at you and say, I can run for president of the United States. I can be the governor of Texas. I can be the mayor of San Antonio. I can be the secretary of housing and urban development. I can be a cabinet member. So what's next for Julián Castro?
Yeah, I've always believed that if you work hard and you're good at what you do, that opportunity is going to come along. Right now, I'm trying to use my voice to help other people get elected, right, in this November election, and doing that through People First Future. And then I have a podcast called Our America that's telling the stories of people who are struggling out there. But in terms of like the next position or what I'm going to be doing in politics, I don't feel compelled right now to run for office or necessarily be in office. We'll see. I haven't taken anything off the table, but I'm not putting anything on the table right now. It's likely that at some point I'll be involved in public service again because I'm very much my mother's son. I don't know that I could run away from it if I tried, but I just don't know what that'll be yet. In the meantime, I'll use my voice any way that I can on issues that I care about and also to help good people get elected in their own right.
How did you choose the term Our America? What does Our America mean to you?
To me, it's in part a reflection on what I hope we're going to create in the years to come, which is this sense that this country belongs to all of us, to our community, in a time where the highest leader of the land has been so divisive and has tried to create different Americas for different communities. Our America is about telling the stories of people of all different backgrounds who share this beautiful country, America, and also laying out there in telling these stories what we can have if we all work together. Because that's the opportunity I think that Joe Biden is going to have, assuming that he wins. He's going to have this opportunity to fashion a nation that is more united and hopefully gains or regains a sense of national purpose and identity to tackle big challenges. We've lost that somewhere along the way. And, the caveat you got to put in is that our community, the Latino community, the African-American community, other people of color, obviously the LGBTQ community, we were never fully, completely wrapped into the notion of America in the same way. But I do feel like in times past, there was a greater sense that we could come together and do big things. Today, it seems more polarized, and we need a leader that is going to bring us together. Joe Biden's going to have that opportunity. And I think it's up to all of us to support an effort to come together and to fashion our America that everybody can be proud of.
Who wins, Biden or Trump?
Biden. Donald Trump surprised us 4 years ago. I was at the Jacob Javits Center, like you probably were 4 years ago, expecting that Hillary was going to win. At 1:30 in the morning, they're announcing that Donald Trump is the new president of the United States. So he pulled a rabbit out of the hat 4 years ago. But I feel like this time things have changed. He's a politician with a track record. He is dealing with an economy that has been hurt terribly by his incompetence because of his failure on COVID-19. He's dealing with COVID-19 that people know is real, most people. It's different. And Joe Biden is different also. It's a different matchup. And Joe Biden, I think, is exactly what people want right now. The experience, the steady hand, the know-how to get things done with so much experience, getting it done in the Senate and as vice president. The sense that, look, we're going to return to some sense of normalcy, the way things should be for government. He's the man of the moment. And I hesitate to say it, but I feel like that even in this state, that you could be seeing a situation where there's a blowout, where it's a landslide, where in the same way that it just didn't seem to make sense 4 years ago, that it was even more than we thought and just didn't make sense. But on the other side, 4 years later, that's really what I'm feeling right now.
This podcast is brought to you by Momento Latino.
We're old friends. What do you hope your daughter, Karina, learns from the journey that your family has been on in the United States of America?
I hope she learns that she can do anything that she wants to do. My grandmother never would have imagined that Joaquin and I could have the kind of opportunity that we've had. One of us to serve in the president's cabinet, the other one to serve in Congress, representing the hometown that she came to in 1922. And I want my daughter to be able to see no limits on her own potential. I also want her to be honest and to always do something for other people, however that is. You know, I don't necessarily want her to go into politics, but however she does it through volunteering or through her profession. My wife is a teacher. That's another way that you make a big impact on people's lives. And fundamentally, like any parent, I mean, I hope that whatever happens, that she lives a happy life. I think there's nothing more that you can ask for if you had one wish for your child than that they're happy.
Thank you, Julián.
Thanks a lot. Good to be with you.
I love you. You're an amazing leader. And the future, who knows what it will bring. Our families have been together for a long time. And I have to say that when I look back, 50 years at your mom, my dad, not waiting, the concept of deciding on behalf of yourself, your family, and your community that you can move things forward, it makes a difference. It does. You have to embrace the moment that you live in and say, okay, I can do something that other people didn't expect.
Absolutely. And I hope that a lot more people will be inspired in our community to do it.
Thank you, Julián.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. On the day before the election, let's remember the words of Willie Velasquez.